So Francis Ngannou has just stopped Renan Ferreira in round 1. He took him down and just beat the shit out of him. So after such an easy win, people are now looking forward to seeing who Ngannou is going to face next. Because Ngannou is the A side, he's a free agent and he can choose where he wants to go next. And if I was his manager, I would let him know that there's 3 possible routes he can take. The first one being the most realistic and also most possible route, and that is going back to boxing. Obviously, because he lost the way he did against Anthony Joshua, his stock has dropped a lot compared to how it was after his fight with Tyson Fury. But it's easy to forget just how good he did against Tyson Fury. Even if Tyson Fury didn't train properly for the fight, which I believe is true, any form of a world champion boxer should be beating an MMA fighter on their debut, and it shouldn't be by split decision getting dropped and hurt multiple times in the fight. I didn't think Ngannou would win a single minute of that fight, but he did a lot better than expected. And people were talking about him after the fight as if it was a real legitimate heavyweight boxing contender. So a matchup like Deontay Wilder is still definitely on the table. Because at this point he's no longer a real heavyweight contender. And not only is it a winnable fight for both men, it's the biggest fight for both men. And it's still a fight that would sell many, many pay-per-views. Another option, if not Wilder, could be Derek Chisora, a fan favourite British fighter. He'd fight anyone for the right amount of money. Or if we're going to go full circus mode, Jake Paul is a massive, massive matchup. Obviously Jake Paul would get curb stomped, but you can't tell me that the pay-per-views wouldn't be in the millions. To go even more circus mode, Hafthor Bjornsson or Eddie Hall are very viable options. Potentially Ngannou versus Paige Van Zandt or Elle Brook. Very fascinating matchups. So boxing is the safest and most realistic option for Ngannou. Personally, I'd push for the Wilder fight or even the Jake Paul fight if possible. Those fights will be the best case scenario for Ngannou in my opinion. We move on to the second route, and that is to stay in the PFL. Unless Ngannou retires, this is the worst case scenario for the fans. There is zero casual appeal to the PFL whatsoever. If you look at the PFL rankings, there's literally zero big names besides Ngannou. The only fight that sort of makes sense would be Ante Deliha or Oleg Popov. Deliha being the same guy who stopped Renan Ferreira in similar fashion to Francis Ngannou by ground and pound TKO in round 1. But there's only one name that I've got genuine interest in seeing outside the UFC. That would be one championship's current heavyweight champion, and that is Anatoly Malykhin. Malykhin being the only 3-weight world champion in any major MMA organisation. By beating the promotion's light heavyweight world champion, they're moving up to fight the heavyweight world champion, and they're moving all the way down to middleweight to face their middleweight champion. Obviously, one championship being in Asia, there's not going to be much competition in the heavyweight classes, but regardless, it's an impressive thing to do. Malykhin's got great wrestling, powerful hands, he's undefeated, 14-0, and it'd be an interesting fight. Our next route is going to be for Ngannou to go back to the UFC. Besides PFL and boxing, this is the only other option for Ngannou, really. It's also obviously the most unrealistic option for Ngannou because of how sour the relationship is between him and the UFC. But let's just assume that the UFC is ready to throw like 20, 40, 50 million dollars at Ngannou for a shot at the heavyweight title against John Jones or Tom Aspinall. There's a small chance Ngannou takes it, and the John Jones fight is the biggest fight they can possibly make in MMA at the moment. But if John Jones retires, Ngannou versus Tom Aspinall is still a huge fight. Francis Ngannou versus Alex Pereira would be a ridiculously huge fight. Tom Aspinall being the most realistic of all those 3 opponents. And it's also a genuinely really interesting matchup. Because if John Jones retires and Ngannou's still active, the conversation will be between Tom Aspinall and Francis Ngannou, who's the best heavyweight in the world. And we would only find out if Ngannou reached a deal with the UFC. But obviously it's a long shot and I don't think it'll happen. So overall, Francis has 3 main paths he can take. If I was him, I'd fight Jake Paul. It'd make him a lot of money and it'd be an easy win. Goodbye.